We're very close with the Kurds, and they've been very supportive of our efforts over there. She says, well, one of our guys brought his guitar around to the guard shacks and played some American music for the Kurds. Sometimes they try to join in. You haven't lived until you've seen a bunch of Iraqi soldiers, these Kurds, complete with AK-47s, sitting around and singing with gusto as they mangle the Beatles' Let It Be. Now, I'm not going to sing this, but just pretend that they're all singing along. In times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, little P. They really got into it. Little P, little P, little P, yeah, little P. Whisper words of wisdom, little P. That was a good day. And Sharon actually wrote, I think, it seems like hundreds of these little vignettes about her, and she'd email them home and so forth. But she saw some pretty tough things over there as well. But the humor is what got her through. And so I want to make sure that that's always emphasized in these books. And and as I said, it's unexpected. And that's what I want to do with these letters. Is every time people think they can anticipate what these books are going to have in them, or what we're going to say, and what the letters express, there's a surprise.
Virginia, go ahead with another question.
Well, you're probably not going to be prepared for this one, but having read some of these, I was just thinking of another female soldier in Iraq, and it was about giving candy out to the children.
Yes.
Maybe you could summarize that. We
Ski.
can't find it right
Her
away.
nickname was Ski, yes. She was just a beautiful little piece about, we do a lot to give out candy and little gifts to children, just they're not afraid of the troops, and that we're there to help them and not to hurt them, of course. And this one, she noticed this throng of kids came over when they were handing out candy, and this one little girl just kind of sat off by the side to herself. She was too shy to come over. So Chris, or Ski is her nickname, went over to her and handed her a whole little bag of candy, not just a piece. And her eyes just lit up, and she very politely looked up at Ski and said, "Thank you," in English. And Ski said to her in Arabic, "Shukran," which is thank you. But what the little girl was shocked about was it was a female soldier, and that when Ski took off her helmet and her hair kind of flowed out a little bit, it was cut to some degree. And she just sort of reflected on the fact that she hoped that maybe that little girl would grow up with the knowledge, that she can be anything, and that's what we're trying to bring, to so many people. And again, not to get political about these things, and we don't in the books. We just, we focus on the troops and what their words are and what they say about these conflicts. But it's a very poignant moment.
I have kind of a series of short questions, and one of them is that you've already indicated on the program that this has changed your life in the sense that history has become a love for you, and before it wasn't. Maybe my question is maybe an impossible one, but out of all those thousands of letters you've gotten, have some of them so affected you that in addition to your love for history, has changed your life in any other way?
Yes, because what they've done is I don't want to get too heavy on this, but it reminded me of how much suffering there is in the world and how grateful I am to be an American, to have a loving family and friends. I find that I don't take things for granted anymore. And in fact, even last week I read that letter by Chris McNeff, who was a peacekeeper, and she said that. She was in Albania. This country's it's very impoverished. I've learned to be more grateful for what I have, and that's definitely something I've taken from these letters.
Second thing is, too, with the letters you read last week and this week, they're very powerful, and you've read some from the troops themselves, but also some from the families. Did you also find in your letters that, I'm thinking of the young people like teenagers or even maybe a little younger, that they, too, have been very powerful in what they have written to their mother or their father or whomever in the war?
We talked about the poetry of these letters last week. One of the most breathtaking lines I've ever read in a letter was written by a 14-year-old Polish boy. He was in a Nazi concentration camp. He was able to smuggle the letter out between the fence to a peasant who eventually got the letter to his parents. I think it took about a year for it to get back to Poland. And the first line is simply this: "My dear parents, if all the skies were paper and all the seas were an inkwell, I could not describe my suffering to you." And it blew my mind when I read that. And it gets back to this issue, too, of just how many people have suffered and have been in pain over the years and still are, and to be very grateful for what we have. But it is the poetry of these words that I think captivates people and what makes them not just historical records, but real literature.
Get you react to one other thing from the exposure I've had to your work and your comments even here today. Doesn't it also give us a different appreciation of the entire human race, that it has so much more depth and comprehension of what life is than than we would have not have had without these words.
You couldn't have asked a better question at this time, because the whole point of the speeches I give and what this is all about is that, to me, these letters are not about war, and they're not about the past. They are only about human nature. They show our capacity for destruction, but also our potential for compassion and reconciliation. They're about grief and hope and despair and mercy and resilience and all these different emotions that every one of us can relate to, even if we've never worn a uniform. And that is why I think these letters have resonated with so many people, whether they are interested in history or whether they served in the military, because it's about human nature.
Just sitting here with you today, it has given me a different comprehension of human nature. Just a remarkable experience. Erna Reinhardt.
I have so many questions, it's hard to pick one. But in your most recent book, share with us the very last story and the story that you picked for the ending of the book. I think
So you talking about Grace Under Fire?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's about two people, a woman named Del Morrow, who during World War II fell in love with a young man named Herman Myrick. They were just teenagers before the war started. Well, after Pearl Harbor, he volunteered to fight, and he went off to serve. They promised each other they'd write to each other all the time. Well, no letters came. And Del was heartbroken, because she really thought she met the love of her life, but not a word, from him. It turns out that her sister was so jealous of this relationship, she was intercepting Herman's letters at the mailbox that he was writing to her. She would take them and just tear them up. Well, she caught her doing this, and she realized what was going on. By this time, Herman just assumed, well, I guess, she's not writing to me either, so she doesn't love me. Both had felt that they had met other people, and that, unfortunately, it hurt the relationship. 50 years later, at this point they were single again. I think they lost their spouses. They're in their late 60s, early 70s at this point. And by sheer coincidence, they saw each other in this some small town in Alabama, and they fell in love all over again. They started dating, and so they got married. And on their when Del had just turned 80, this is just past October, because the book is very recent. She wrote Herman, it was like their 10th wedding anniversary, because they've only been married for 10 years and they were 70 when it happened, saying, and I love this line, and regardless of one's views on faith, I think it's just a very poignant and beautiful sentiment. She said, I regret those 50 years that we've been apart. We could have had a wonderful life together, but you have made the past 10 years the happiest in my life. And sometimes God's timing isn't our timing. And it's just, she goes on to talk about how meaningful the relationship has been, and that maybe if we had been married all this time, it wouldn't have been so great. But now it's been really special, and some knowing laughter at the end. But it's a really beautiful letter, and she wrote it because they had children through their other marriages and so forth, and grandchildren. She really wrote it both for Herman on their anniversary, but also for posterity, because she recounts the entire story with the sister and so forth. And one quick just post note, it's not in the book, because I just got an email from her. I keep in touch with these folks. Her sister just passed away, but they reconciled before she died. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very powerful.
That's what I wanted to know. What happened to the sister?
yeah. But they reconciled. So.
Virginia Johnson.
Today, several of the students, and they wrote their questions on cards. Many of them want to know, what is your favorite letter, or the most powerful or most affecting one? And I think you shared with them one.
Yeah, there's one. I mean, it really changes because they all affect me in different ways. Do we have? This is a bit of a story. Do we have about a minute or so? Okay.
We got time.
It's a little different because it's written by the parents to their 9-year-old daughter, Beryl, and this is the Myatt family. And you go back to, this letter was written in September of 1940, and this is getting to focusing on civilians and the home front and so forth. What happened was that in July 1940, the Germans began these massive air attacks on London and throughout England, and parents were just terrified. They wanted to get their children either off to the countryside or just out of England to other countries where they could live with family and be safe. But it was very difficult to do this. But the Myatt family got approval to let Beryl, their 9-year-old daughter, go to Canada to live with her aunt and uncle. And so 2 days after she left, they wrote her a letter, very beautiful, sort of encouraging letter, because it's got to be very scary for a 9-year-old girl to leave her family, her parents, go all the way across the ocean to stay with strangers. But they wanted this letter to be waiting for her when she got there, just saying, you're on this great adventure, and we love you, and we're so proud of you, and all these things. It's a really very sweet letter. And I read the letter knowing what was going to happen next, because the person who sent it to me told me the whole story. And I can't get through it the whole letter without really kind of losing it, because the background is that 700 miles out to sea, a German sub found the ship the Beryl was on, the SS City of Benares, and torpedoed it. And 300 passengers, including 80 children, either died in the fire or drowned in the sea. And Beryl was among the dead. And the disconnect of this mother writing to her young daughter with such high hopes of happiness, and everything's going to be okay, and at least you'll be safe. And this act of savagery, this is a civilian ship, and the fact that Beryl never made it, to me, in some ways, people say, what's the most, what letter captures the horror of war? And they always think it's going to be a battle letter, combat. Mm-hmm. And there are some that we have that I could probably name. But the innocence of this letter, the sweetness of it, and in the context of the evil behind it, it really affected me the first time I read it, and still does. And I'm not looking to depress people, and I'm not looking to, I know some people are like, I just don't want to read something like that. We sort of have to. We have to remember what some of these families have lost, and what these troops have sacrificed as well.
On that note, which brings us from the conclusion, it's a powerful note on which to end it. I really want to thank you, Andrew Carroll, the best-selling author of these very powerful books, and including the one on, most recently, War Letters. We've been doing this program for 36 years, and this is one of the more powerful programs we've done in all that time, and you've been so generous with your time. We thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Virginia, thank you for your role in this whole process, and we want to also thank Idaho Humanities Council. Again, it shows the importance of that organization and how powerful it is, and how that is a very important part of our life. The humanities and the arts are both essential to having a meaningful life. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join us again next week at the same time, when we will move to yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.